Welcome to the next lesson in our course, where we begin our coverage of the mono class in Project Reactor. We'll start out by talking about some of the key mono operators, beginning initially with factory methods. If you recall, factory methods are an implementation of the factory method pattern from the Gang of Four book. And these particular operators are used to create mono objects in various ways from other types of data. And we'll be focusing on the just and fromCallable factory methods in the mono class. The just method is used to create a new mono that emits the specified item. This item is passed as the one and only parameter to the just method. You can see here that there's a parameter of type t that's passed to just. Just returns the mono that's captured at instantiation time. So what that means is that just is a so-called eager operator, and therefore it always runs in the thread of control where the assembly is being performed. The assembly is just the chain of methods that are being put together to create the particular sequence of steps for a mono in this particular case. Keep the semantics of just in mind when we talk about the subscribe on operator, because the fact that the processing is done in the assembly thread often has some somewhat unexpected side effects or some expected non-side effects, as we'll see here shortly. This factory method is commonly used to adapt non-reactive input sources into the reactive model that we see with reactive streams. So here's a simple example that you can see in the link at the bottom of the slide, where we use the just method to create a mono that will reduce a big fraction. So let's say we have an unreduced fraction, and now we're going to go ahead and reduce it, and we're going to have the just method used in order to create a mono that will emit the results of going ahead and doing that reduction. Now, what's again important to understand here, and just keep this in mind, this value, this big fraction dot reduce unreduced fraction, this is captured eagerly at instantiation time and is therefore the value that's returned for all subscribers that might come along later. So we're always going to get back that particular value. RxJava has a just method that works exactly the same way. So in this case, there's a class in RxJava called single, and single.just will go ahead and do the same thing. It does this eagerly, and in this case, we'll go ahead and reduce a big fraction. So with that in mind, the semantics of just, which again are eager, let's talk about fromCallable. This is also a factory method that's used to create a mono of type t. So at first glance, it looks very similar to what we just saw with just. The main difference is that the mono's value is produced via the provided callable supplier. So you can see there's a class called callable that's been in Java since Java 1.5 back in the 2004 timeframe. And this is actually used very extensively in Java Executor framework for things like submitting two-way asynchronous calls. In this particular case, what it's used for is to generate a value, and then it will return the mono that's emitted by the supplier at runtime. And therefore, it's lazy, whereas just was eager. So just is eager, fromCallable is lazy. And we'll talk a bit more about what that means in just a minute. Also, we'll keep this in mind when we talk about the semantics of the subscribe on method later, because subscribe on will behave differently when you use it with a lazy operation like fromCallable as opposed to an eager operation like just. This factory method, like just, is also commonly used to adapt non-reactive input sources into the overall reactive model. So you can see in this particular case, we say mono.fromCallable, and we're going to give it a callable supplier that will, when called at runtime, go ahead and reduce a big fraction. The difference, however, is that fromCallable is lazy. So this call to big fraction.reduce doesn't actually take place in the assembly thread. It'll take place in the thread where this particular computation is specified to run. And that can be changed by using the subscribe on operator, as we'll see later. Another thing to note here is that every time there's a different subscriber that wants to get this particular value, it's going to be invoking this particular callable separately. And in this particular case, you'll probably get back the same result. But if we were having something that was using, say, a random number generator, or it was connected to some kind of live data stream, then you could in fact get back different calls each time the callable supplier was called, as opposed to the just method where you'll always get back the same result for all the subscribers. There's also a fromCallable method in project in RxJava. And so single.fromCallable works in exactly the same way as the project Reactor's mono fromCallable method. They're both lazy. So that's the end of our overview of some of the factor methods in the mono class. We'll come back later and see that there's other methods we'll talk about as well, but this is a good place to start.